He stood at the center of the press conference, my name barely out of his mouth when the handcuffs snapped onto my wrists. I can still hear the cameras clicking, the collective gasp of the crowd, and the way my legs didn't quite cooperate as they led me away. Vincent Sallow, CFO of Zenith Global Holdings, arrested today on charges of securities fraud and embezzlement. The news anchor would announce an hour later, smiling like she didn't just bury a man's entire life in a single sentence. But he did. Liam Hardwick, my CEO, my friend, or so I thought. We had built Zenith together over a decade, from a boutique consultancy into a mid-cap financial powerhouse with international clients and a high-valuation pre-IPO. I'd trusted him with everything, my loyalty, my late nights, even my silence. I was the numbers guy, the architect behind the systems. But Liam? He was the face, the charming visionary, and the man who, 3 days ago, walked me into a meeting with federal agents and said, I didn't know Vince was hiding those accounts. I trusted him. The betrayal wasn't in the lie. It was in how smooth it was. Like he'd practiced. I spent 2 nights in jail. They moved fast. The feds had documents, transactions, shell companies I'd never heard of, all routed through the internal finance architecture I had designed. From the outside, it looked like I was siphoning millions through overseas consulting fees. In reality, Liam had used my own work to frame me. His digital fingerprints were wiped clean. Mine were everywhere. On the invoices, the approvals, the logs. Because I trusted the systems. Because I built them. Because I never imagined I needed to protect myself from him. My wife, Lena, picked me up after I was released on conditional bail. Her face was tight, not with anger, but something worse, doubt. They said the evidence is overwhelming, she said quietly in the car. Please, Vincent, tell me it's not true. I didn't answer, because right then, I couldn't. Not just because of the shock, but because I didn't know how deep it went yet. I had no proof, no theory, just a bitter gut feeling and a numb silence where my life used to be. 3 hours later, my lawyer quit. Too risky, he said. Conflict of interest. This case is toxic, Vince. You're radioactive. Lena stayed with her sister that night. She took a small bag and said she needed space. I understood. Hell, part of me would have done the same. I was alone in our high-rise condo, the one Liam and I celebrated buying after Zenith's best quarter. Every square inch of that place echoed with the taste of false victories. I stared out at the city lights, wine glass untouched beside me, until sunrise. Then I got up, opened my laptop, and started to dig. If Liam thought I'd roll over quietly, he'd forgotten who taught him to calculate risk. He thought I was 3 steps behind. He didn't realize I was already building the rest of the board. You don't come back from a setup like that by shouting. You come back by listening. And I started by listening to silence, the kind that fills your inbox when nobody wants to touch you. No calls from old colleagues. No friendly texts from board members. Just one message from Zenith's legal counsel, advising me to cooperate fully. The company I'd helped build wanted me buried fast. Liam was making sure of it. The day after my release, he did a one-on-one with CNBC. Sat there in a gray suit I helped him pick out for investor meetings and told the world how heartbroken he was to discover my betrayal. That word, betrayal. The man who smiled while framing me used that word like he believed it. But I knew Liam better than he thought. And I knew how to follow patterns, because patterns don't lie, even when people do. For 2 weeks, I played the part of the disgraced executive, quiet, unreachable, out of the game. In reality, I was digging. First into the internal logs of the shell companies mentioned in the charges, Black Harbor Consulting, Melrose Analytics, Haven Trace Limited. They were clean, surface level, obvious, designed to collapse and pin the stink on me. But I remembered something. A conversation 6 months ago, after our quarterly review. Liam had asked me how easy it was to create temporary accounts within our system. Real invoices, false vendors, masked routing. You mean like shell pass-throughs? I joked. He nodded. Hypothetically. At the time, I thought he was thinking about client strategy. Now I knew better. So I started searching for what wasn't obvious. I remembered our servers had mirrored backups, deep archives, rarely touched unless we were restoring from a crash. I still had remote access from my laptop. My clearance hadn't been revoked yet. Liam thought locking me out of my Zenith email would be enough. But I'd built more than email. I'd built the infrastructure. 2 nights in, I found it, a ghost entry. A vendor ID with no metadata. It wasn't assigned a name, but the invoice trail led to a series of routing numbers that matched offshore transfers. Small, at first, $5,000. Then $30,000. Then $200,000. But what hit me hardest wasn't the size. It was the approval signature. Mine. Not just a digital SIG, an exact time-stamped entry from my user ID, logged from my Zenith-issued laptop, which had been in IT's possession that week for software upgrades. He timed it perfectly, used my own hardware while it was out of my hands, spoofed my credentials, made it look like I greenlit the transactions myself. I felt sick, not just because of what he did, but because it had worked. Even I couldn't explain it away. I printed everything, every log, every timestamp. Then I started building the counter-narrative, the one that would take more than just evidence to prove. It would take context, motive, something only someone close to Liam would know. That's when I reached out to Marla. Marla Chin had been Liam's executive assistant for 4 years. Sharp, overlooked, underpaid. She knew the calendar inside out, every meeting, every deviation from protocol. I'd always treated her well, not because I thought it would matter, but because it was right. She picked up on the second ring. Vincent, you heard. I heard more than I wanted to. Are you okay? Not really, but I need your help. And I think you know he's not clean. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, come to my apartment. Don't text. Don't email. Just come. When I arrived, she had a file waiting. He used my computer 3 times in the last quarter, she said, flipping through a printed calendar. Once during an investor call when his laptop died. Once before your offsite in Chicago. And once on the day the Haven Trace wire went out. Was your machine on the company network? She nodded. Full access. Jesus. He logged in under his own name, but ran a couple of terminal commands I didn't recognize, she added. I asked about them. He said it was system maintenance. System maintenance. Liam didn't know a line of code from a coffee order. I didn't say anything because she hesitated. Because I didn't think it mattered. But when I saw the report on the charges and saw those wired dates, I went back and checked the security logs. I still had access. She handed me a USB. What's on it? Screen recordings. I use software to track my desktop sessions for compliance training. He never knew it was active. I stared at her. Marla, this could save my life. She looked away, eyes wet. He promised me a promotion. Promised he'd make me chief of staff after the IPO. Then last week, I got a termination notice. Said my position was redundant. Because he thought you were loyal. No, because he thought I was quiet. That night, I watched the recordings on a loop. Liam, sitting at her desk, using her system. Typing commands. Opening shell invoices. Triggering the wire routing sequence. His face, calm. Methodical. Smiling, even. He buried me with the same hands he used to pat my back. I sat in the dark until morning, the screen still playing, rage crawling up my throat like bile. The next day, the FBI agent assigned to my case, Agent Briggs, called me for another interview. I think it's time we had a real conversation, I told him. Because you're not chasing the criminal. You're chasing his shadow. I sent him the logs, the USB, everything. 3 hours later, he showed up at my door. Where did you get this? He asked, breathless. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, I said quietly. But this time, someone made me forget that. He leaned against the doorframe, stunned. If this holds up, your case will be dropped. It will hold up, I said. But I'm not done. Vincent. No. He buried me. I'm just digging my way out. Briggs paused. You know this doesn't end with evidence. No, I said, voice calm. It ends when he's exposed in front of the same cameras that watched him crucify me. He nodded, slowly. Then let's get to work. The press didn't touch the new evidence. Not yet. Not because it wasn't real, but because Liam's narrative was already too well established. I was the fall guy, the rogue CFO. That story sold. Mine didn't. Not yet. So I stopped playing defense. No more reacting. No more waiting for breaks. It was time to move in silence. Briggs and his team started pulling threads. Subpoenas went out quietly to Zenith's internal IT logs, their off-site backups, and Liam's personal company laptop. But he was careful. Almost too careful. The data that came back was clean, a little too clean. His digital footprint had been scrubbed by someone who knew how to mask patterns without leaving gaps. But there was one thing I designed that even he had forgotten. A redundancy. When I built Zenith's finance backend, I created a small test environment on a sandbox server, off-grid, offline, and encrypted with a personal failsafe key. I used it to model changes before pushing them live, something no one else even knew existed. Marla had reminded me of it in passing during one of our conversations. If the approval logs were spoofed, wouldn't there be a record on your dev mirror? My blood ran cold. I hadn't touched that server in over a year. But if the transactions were cloned in the live environment, and if Liam had used internal credentials to forge approvals, the timestamp discrepancies might still live in the shadow code. That night, I drove to the server farm outside Stanford where Zenith leased private racks. I still had my key card. The digital lock hadn't been revoked. The rack was there, tucked behind row after row of humming steel. I booted the offline machine, logged in, and opened the transaction simulator. And there it was. A 42-second discrepancy between the timestamp on the Haven Trace approval in the production environment and the same entry on the dev sandbox. Impossible, unless the original was altered. It was the kind of forensic crack prosecutors love. Quiet, irrefutable, undeniably specific. But I needed more than code. I needed to shake the tree hard enough that something would fall, or someone. Marla and I worked for 2 weeks in secret. She'd found a stash of Liam's old call logs buried in the admin cache of his Outlook account. One of them, just 3 days before my arrest, was a 45-minute encrypted call with a contact labeled HR and XT. I recognized the format immediately. Internal/external HR consulting, a euphemism we used for corporate crisis contractors. Liam hadn't just planned to frame me. He'd planned the exit strategy, the media angles, the board narrative. But here's the twist. The call was routed through a shell firm registered to a consulting group in Delaware, which had previously done work for another firm Liam used to advise before Zenith. And guess who the primary stakeholder was? Liam's cousin, Noah Hardwick. I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just betrayal, it was legacy laundering. He'd used his family connections to funnel stolen funds, scrub involvement, and repurpose the money into investment vehicles through third parties. I had enough now to start breaking things. But breaking things wasn't enough. I wanted a mirror held to his face, and the face of everyone who helped him. So I made one final move. I called Malcolm Dre. He used to be Zenith's outside counsel. Left 3 years ago after a falling out with Liam over ethical disagreements. Brilliant, reclusive, and dangerous when motivated. He picked up on the second ring. "Vince," he said, "didn't expect to hear from you unless the sky was falling. It already fell. Now I'm picking through the rubble." I explained everything. Slowly, clearly, methodically. Malcolm didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Liam tried to build a palace on fire," he said. "But you brought a hose. I want his board vote revoked. His shares frozen. And I want it to happen while he's on camera smiling." "You'll need one thing," Malcolm said. "Proof he monetized the fraud." I sent him the Delaware filings, the ledger of matching accounts, and the consulting payments routed through Noah's firm. There was silence. Then, "That'll do." 3 days later, Malcolm and I filed a sealed motion with the SEC. The evidence packet was 184 pages long. The investigation would trigger a mandatory board review at Zenith. And here was the beautiful part. If it was proven that Liam had profited from insider fraud and manipulated internal systems, he'd be automatically removed pending litigation. But that wasn't the endgame. My real weapon came 1 week later. Zenith's annual shareholder meeting. I showed up unannounced, just another disgraced executive in a cheap Navy suit. They didn't recognize me at first. The shareholders barely made eye contact. Then Liam took the stage. He was radiant, confident, backed by a half-smirk that looked rehearsed. He launched into his carefully memorized speech about growth, resilience, the challenges of internal betrayal. He even referenced me by name. That's when the screen behind him flickered, and I stepped onto the stage. The murmur spread like a wave. I walked to the other microphone, holding a small black folder in my hand. Security moved to intercept, but someone at the back of the room shouted, "Let him speak." The room stilled. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, voice calm, clear. "What Mr. Hardwick didn't tell you is that the betrayal came from the top. That the man you've entrusted with your capital, your confidence, your future, used that trust to funnel millions into offshore accounts. That he used his own assistant's computer to stage false approvals. that he weaponized my access to build the perfect fall guy. Liam's face didn't twitch, but his hands started to shake. And here, I said, holding up a USB, is the screen recording of him doing it. A slow inhale spread across the auditorium. Malcolm, seated in the back row, rose and handed a copy of the SEC motion to the board chair. 10 minutes later, Liam was escorted from the room, not in cuffs, not yet, but with his legacy in tatters. I didn't smile. This wasn't the win. It was just the start of the reckoning. I waited a full day before I met him face to face. Long enough for the headlines to shift from Zenith CEO defiant amid allegations to Sallow vindicated, SEC expands inquiry. The world was starting to understand what I already knew. Liam Hardwick wasn't just a fraud. He was a master of controlled collapse. And for once, he'd lost control. I found him at the private club on the east side, the one we used to celebrate deals at back when we still believed we were building something honest. He was sitting in the corner, hunched over a tumbler of scotch, staring into a glass like it held answers. He looked smaller. The tailored suit didn't help anymore. No camera lights, no shareholders, no audience to charm. "Vince," he said, without turning, "you've made your point." I sat across from him, resting my elbows on the table. That wasn't the point. He finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "You want to humiliate me? You want me on the front page next to a mugshot? You want to watch me fall apart?" "I already watched you do that," I said. "The day you decided I was expendable." He chuckled, bitter and low. "I kept the company alive. You think the board would have backed our IPO without me? You think the investors cared about your spreadsheets? You didn't keep it alive," I said. "You buried it and used my name as the headstone." He leaned forward, jaw tightening. "You don't know what pressure is. You never had to stand in front of rooms full of men who could erase us with a single call. I made decisions to protect what we built." "You protected yourself," I said, "and you sacrificed everyone else to do it." His hand twitched on the glass. I could see it, the defiance still clinging to him, like a threadbare coat in a storm. "You're clean now, right?" he muttered. "Charges dropped. Record wiped. You get to be the wounded genius. A redemption story." "I didn't come for redemption," I said, voice steady. "I came for clarity." He blinked. "I wanted to look you in the face and ask, did it ever mean anything to you? The late nights, the risk, the building. Did we ever matter? Or was I just the easiest man to throw to the wolves?" The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was empty. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said finally. "I thought you'd fold. Take the fall. Vanish for a while. Resurface with a smaller firm, maybe." "You built that story in your head," I said, "and made it real." "I had to." "No," I said. "You chose to." He looked at me then, truly looked. Something in his expression cracked. Not regret. Not sorrow. Something darker. Like he knew this moment was the end of something, and that it wouldn't be dignified. "You're going to burn it all down, aren't you?" he whispered. "No," I said. "But I'm not going to save it." He nodded slowly, understanding what that meant. The board would eat itself trying to restructure. The SEC would crawl through every corner of Zenith's books. Clients would flee. Stock would crater. There wouldn't be a clean ending, just attrition. I stood. "One last thing." He looked up. "Your cousin Noah?" He flipped. His face drained of color. "He gave us the paper trail. All of it." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to see him break. I'd already seen enough. The man who once called me his quiet backbone was now unraveling in public, not with a bang, but with a whisper of loss. Outside, the air was cool, sharp, honest. Marla was waiting by the car. She handed me her phone. "You need to hear this," she said. It was a voicemail from one of Zenith's junior accountants, a soft-spoken woman named Eliza I barely remembered meeting. "Mr. Sallow," she said, her voice trembling, I just wanted to say thank you. After the press conference, I went back and looked at some things. There are transactions that didn't make sense. You were right. He framed you. I didn't know who to tell. But I saw your speech. You stood up to him. And now I think I can too." Marla watched me as I listened, silent. "I didn't do it for them," I said. She nodded. "Doesn't matter. They're watching anyway." I looked up at the gray skyline. Somewhere behind those windows, boardrooms were scrambling. Lawyers were panicking. Headlines were rewriting themselves in real time. The empire Liam built was still standing, for now. But the rot was visible, and there was no one left to hide it. It fell with a letter. A white envelope slid under my door at 7:12 a.m. On a Tuesday, the same kind of envelope I used to hand off to legal when things went quiet after bad earnings calls. But this one was addressed to me. No postage. No name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. We formally request your presence at the Zenith Global Holdings Emergency Board Session, 10 a.m. Room 47A, Midtown Tower. No title. No Mr. Sallow. No apology. But I understood. The walls were closing in, and now they needed the man they'd framed to help hold them up. I got dressed in silence. Black suit. No tie. The same watch I wore to our IPO pitch 3 years earlier. The one Liam bought for me after we landed our biggest client. We're building a legacy, he'd said. Turns out he built a warning. When I arrived, the boardroom was half-lit and tense. Chairs filled with old money and older egos. Men and women who once greeted me with champagne and first names now barely nodded as I entered. Liam wasn't in the room. Not anymore. The chair, Malcolm, gestured toward the open seat. Vincent, thank you for coming. I didn't respond. Just sat. The screen behind him flickered on. It was a list. 37 transactions. Each one tied to a shell firm. Each one signed off with forged approvals. All now officially attributed to Liam through timestamps, VPN logs, and secondary devices discovered in a hidden server cabinet in his penthouse. A whistleblower had come forward the night before. One of his own fixers, scared he'd be the next one thrown under the bus. The numbers didn't lie anymore. $18. $4 million misappropriated. $6. $2 million funneled into consulting fees. $3. $7 million moved offshore under contractor expenses. And a pattern. Every one of those payments routed through systems I'd built. Not because I touched the money, but because he knew my fingerprints would mask his. The board watched me closely. Malcolm cleared his throat. Vincent, as of this morning, all charges against you are officially dismissed. The Department of Justice will be making a statement later today. We owe you more than we can say. I nodded. I don't need your apology. Then what do you want? I looked at every face around that table. Men who had looked the other way. Women who had signed off on every restructure Liam proposed. Not because they were evil, but because they were complicit in their comfort. They'd wanted Liam to be real more than they wanted him to be honest. I want clarity in writing, I said. A full public exoneration, signed by every member of this board. You'll have it. I want my severance, the one you denied after my arrest, paid in full. Of course. And I want no non-compete clause. I'm walking away with every idea I ever had. Every blueprint. Every system. And I'm taking it somewhere that actually values truth over theater. There was a pause. Then a quiet chorus of agreement. Malcolm nodded. Done. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and turned to the door. Vincent, one of the directors called. What will you do next? I paused. Thought about it. Then said, build something honest. And never look back. 3 months later, I watched Zenith stock fall below half its pre-scandal value. Clients pulled contracts. Government investigations expanded. The board replaced 3 members. The rest clung to what was left like rats on the last dry plank. Liam's assets were frozen. He disappeared from the news after his mugshot leaked. Pale, cuffed, no tie, no smile. Just another man who flew too close to his own fiction. But me? I didn't run. I didn't hide. I started over. A small firm. 10 employees. No press releases. Just work. Quiet, honest work. I met with every client myself. Designed the systems. Signed every ledger. Hired people who'd once been overlooked, like Marla, now my head of operations. People who saw what truth looked like because they'd survived its absence. One night, I got a call. Unknown number. I answered out of curiosity. It was Lena. I saw the press release, she said. About the new company. Thoughts? You look different in the photo, she said. Stronger. A little sadder. I didn't respond. You were telling the truth the whole time, she added. Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm not, I said. It made me realize how alone I really was. There was silence. Then, if you ever want to talk. Lena, I said gently, I'm building again. And this time, I'm building alone. Some nights, I still think about that moment. The second Liam gestured toward the agents and said, I didn't know what he was doing. That pause. That flicker of hesitation before he let me fall. I don't hate him anymore. Because hate would mean he still matters. But I remember every detail. And now, every step I take forward, every signature, every client win, it's a step away from that room, that table, that betrayal. He put me behind bars for something he did himself. But I came back with proof. And when the truth hit him, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in a mirror, where every man eventually meets his equal.